security are indivisible. And we will be back with more news. And from the cradle, Belarus and Iran sign a roadmap to increase economic cooperation. Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko's visit to Tehran saw the signing of comprehensive roadmap agreement to increase economic cooperation in the face of Western sanctions. The president of Iran and Belarus signed a roadmap to comprehensive cooperation as both countries seek to develop closer ties in the face of Western-imposed economic sanctions, Tasnim news agency reported. Following talks in Tehran on 13 March, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi and Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko signed the roadmap to expand cooperation in the trade, transportation, and agriculture sectors, as well as regarding culture and artistic activities. Government ministers and ranking officials from the two countries also signed 7 other cooperation agreements during the joint meetings. Iranian President Raisi highlighted Iran's progress in withstanding U.S.-imposed economic sanctions and its success in turning threats into opportunities, stating Iran's prepared to share its experience in this era of sanctions with Belarus as a friendly country. Raisi also expressed Iran's intention to broaden ties with Belarus in the context of regional and international organizations, saying meaningful negotiations have been held in this regard. Raisi added, "We can have very good cooperation by using the capacity of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union and promote such cooperation according to the common stances and interests." The Belarusian president praised Iran for making progress independently, regardless of the sanctions and international pressure it faced. The U.S. and EU imposed a range of sanctions on Belarus, banning exports including tobacco products, potash, mineral fuels, and products made of wood, steel, and rubber. The sanctions followed Belarus' support for Russia's February 2022 military intervention in the Ukrainian civil war, which began in 2014. The sanctions also prohibit transactions with Belarus's central bank, place limits on financial inflows, and ban the use of the SWIFT payment system to 5 Belarusian banks. Lukashenko stated that the implementation of all bilateral agreements will allow Belarus and Iran to increase the value of trade between the two countries to 100 million. He also stated that Belarus and Iran share views on regional and international issues as they both favor fairness and multilateralism in the world. Both Iran and Belarus have been targets of U.S.-backed regime change efforts known as color revolutions in previous years. After Lukashenko's 2020 election victory, a U.S.-backed color revolution was attempted, while Iran was targeted in 2009 by a color revolution, which U.S. President Barack Obama ultimately called off, and again in the fall of 2022, following the death in police custody of the young woman Mahsa Amini. And from New York, visit to Tehran and Belarus to develop relations. Iran and the former Soviet Union Republic of Belarus want to expand their relations. Iran and the former Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Republic of Belarus, want to expand their relations. This was announced by Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi during a visit by ruler Alexander Lukashenko to Tehran. The Islamic Republic has developed new opportunities in the face of Western sanctions, said Raisi, and we're ready to share our experience with the friendly country Belarus. Both countries are among the supporters of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine and are subject to Western sanctions. Previously, Lukashenko had been received with military honors in Tehran. According to Iranian information, a total of 8 declarations of intent for closer cooperation were signed, including the banking sector. Iran had previously agreed on closer economic and military cooperation with Russia, and Lukashenko, who's been in power in Belarus for more than a quarter of a century, was in China just a few days ago. Meanwhile, Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has described Lukashenko as an accomplice to the Kremlin in the war of aggression against Ukraine. He carries out all orders from Russian President Vladimir Putin, Tikhanovskaya said on Deutschlandfunk. Attacks on Ukraine would not be possible without his approval. Lukashenko is selling his country's independence bit by bit. We see a Russian occupation not only militarily, but they also occupy Belarus in the media, in the economic sphere. Tichanovskaya continued. The only thing Lukashenko still controls inside Belarus today is repression. Lukashenko has been in power in the former Soviet Republic for more than a quarter of a century. Critics call him Europe's last dictator. The EU has not recognized him as a head of state since the 2020 election, which was marked by numerous manipulation scandals, while with the backing of Russia, he brutally suppressed mass protests. Since then, he's been considered dependent on Putin. Lukashenko makes his country available as a deployment area for the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. And Tichanovskaya ran against Lukashenko in 2020. She now lives in exile in Lithuania, in her homeland. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison. And from Mayor News, Galibaf stresses need for stepped-up Iran-Belarus relations. Mohammad Bagheri Galibaf held a meeting with Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, and his accompanying delegation on Monday evening, during which he stressed that the visit of the Belarusian delegation could be a turning point in the bilateral ties between the two nations. The speaker said that the new developments in their international relations stress the need for more cooperation between states that oppose U.S. unilateralism, adding that both nations are under the Western sanctions as well. Therefore, they need to work together more than before. He also called for stepped-up economic relations along with the political ties, saying, "We must develop economic, monetary, and financial relations, and relations in the field of transportation, especially in connection with Eurasia, as well as for preferential cooperation in the field of exchanges and facilitating relations between merchants and transportation, and establishing relations between intellectuals in different fields to such an extent that the level of bilateral trade would increase from the current $100 million to several $billion, and this potential exists in both countries." Galibaf further considered it as necessary to develop the relations between the parliaments of the two countries. Lukashenko, for his part, stated that today we've realized the necessity that we have to reach agreements that can be implemented, adding the volume of bilateral exchanges has increased 3 times more than before today, including the development of economic and commercial cooperation. This lays the ground for the development of any other relationship, although the volume of transactions of $100 million is almost nothing. The Belarusian president said that with the implementation of the agreements he signed with the Iranian president earlier today, the level of ties will increase. He added that Belarus sees no limits for expanding ties with Tehran, declaring that when he has arrived back home, he'll follow up on expanding banking ties with Iran, like the ties Tehran has recently established with Moscow. He also stressed the need for closer cooperation among the sanctioned countries. And from tvr.by, Belarus to take part in development of north-south transport corridor via Iran. Belarus, along with Iran and Russia, will participate in the development of international transport corridor north-south. This is reported by the Minister of Transport and Communications, Alexei Avramenko. Today, the Iranian side requires building about 180 kilometers of railroad. The Iranian side has actively gotten down to this work to complete the north-south railway corridor in the direction of Bandar Abbas port. This is also important for us because when we talk about transport in Iran, we also talk about transit via Iran to distant countries. This is a very important corridor, and we've agreed to develop it together, said Alexei Avramenko. The minister also noted that following the negotiations of the presidents of Belarus and Iran, a protocol on amendments to the Intergovernmental Agreement on International Automobile Transport of February 4, 1998 was signed. This means that our carriers, as well as Iranian carriers, can freely perform the bilateral transportation, he explained. And from Al-Mayadeen, Belarus, Iran vow to cement ties stand in the face of sanctions. The two presidents agree on a roadmap to increase political, economic, and cultural cooperation. The president of Iran and Belarus praised their close ties during talks in Tehran Monday, at a time both countries are sharply at odds with Western powers, most notably regarding the war in Ukraine. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi held the 3 decades of close relations with Belarus after talks with his counterpart Alexander Lukashenko, who arrived late Sunday for a 2-day visit. 30 years after the start of relations, the two countries have the will to strengthen cooperation, Raisi said, applauding their common strategic vision. Lukashenko said he had monitored with great respect the perseverance with which the Iranian people fight external pressures, attempts to impose the will of the others on them. And I see that despite everything, you're developing modern technologies in nuclear energy in reference to Iran's nuclear program. It's worth noting that Iran is constantly denied seeking to acquire an atomic weapon. We could be very helpful to each other if we really put our efforts together, added Lukashenko. The two presidents agreed on a roadmap to increase political, economic, and cultural cooperation, according to the state news agency IRNA. Lukashenko and his delegation later met with Iran's leaders Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Countries sanctioned by the United States should work together and form a group to eliminate the tactic of sanctions, and we think that can be done, Khamenei said. Saeed Khamenei further added, the severe sanctions made Iran aware of its capabilities and internal strengths. During this time, the sanctions provided the ground for many developments in Iran, and our country was able to advance outstandingly in various fields, including science and technology, medicine and biology, aerospace science, nuclear technology, and nanotechnology. Recalling the fields of cooperation between Iran and Belarus in the fields of science and technology, commerce and political activities in international spheres, the Supreme Leader referred to the International North-South Transport Corridor, adding the establishment of the North-South Transport Corridor is in the interest of both countries as well as Russia and the region. Both sides should work hard to create it. Ayatollah Khamenei underlined the agreements and talks should not include in meetings. Ayatollah Khamenei underlined that agreements and talks should not conclude in meetings, but should be implemented and followed up at certain predetermined times. On his part, the Belarusian president stated, I've come to Iran to assure you that I'm determined to open a new page in the relations between the two countries, and with the cooperation and will of the Iranian president, we will implement all agreements with special follow-up and at certain ascertained times. The president of Belarus emphasized that the Islamic Republic of Iran has achieved amazing experiences and progress during the sanctions period, and we believe that if we take advantage of the conditions of the sanctions properly, it can be used as an opportunity to make progress. I made this trip to Iran in order to familiarize myself with Iran's achievements. The current difficult international situation has shown us who our true and fake friends are. We are determined to have special cooperation with our real partners, Lukashenko added. This marks Lukashenko's 3rd visit to Tehran. His last visit was in 2006. And from tvr.by, Iran's ready to share its experience of opposing sanctions with Belarus. This was stated by President of Iran Ibrahim Raisi during a meeting with representatives of the media after talks in Tehran with President of Belarus Alexander Lukashenko. Despite the threats and sanctions against the Islamic Republic of Iran, we've been able to achieve good results and transform sanctions into opportunities. We're ready to share our experience with the friendly country of the Republic of Belarus in this direction, said Ibrahim Raisi. The President of Iran has no doubt that the current visit of the Belarusian leader can become a starting point in the development of bilateral relations. Following the talks of the heads of state, signed a roadmap of comprehensive cooperation between Belarus and Iran for 2023 through 2026. The document envisages the development of cooperation between Belarus and Iran in the political, economic, consular, scientific, technical areas, as well as in education, culture, art, media, and tourism. Good agreements have been reached in industry, trade, transport, and agriculture. We're confident that these agreements will be implemented, the Iranian head of state stressed. The will of the two countries is to develop relations in all spheres without exception. According to him, Iran's also interested in developing relations with Belarus on the platforms of international organizations, in particular the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the EAEC, and we had very good, fruitful negotiations in this regard. And also from tvr.by, Lukashenko offers Iran to create joint high-tech industries. Belarus and Iran could create joint high-tech productions. This was stated by President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, in Tehran during a meeting with First President Mohamed Mokhber, Beta informs. Mr. Vice President, actually that's First Vice President Mohamed Mokhber. Mr. Vice President, you know that we had very fruitful talks with the head of state, the President of Iran. We've stated unequivocally that the basis of any relationship and understanding is the economy, and you're the main person in the economy. So the implementation of our agreements will largely depend on the government of Iran, which you head, said Alexander Lukashenko. The head of the state said that he'd visited an exhibition of the leading medical and scientific innovative manufacturers together with the president of Iran after the talks. I've seen some examples or samples of what you're doing. You amaze me. You create very high-tech equipment that the whole world needs. Turbines, various information, communication things, the most modern medicines. It's very expensive. We're ready to cooperate with you on these spheres. If you're interested, let us set up joint ventures in Belarus and trade around the world, the president suggested. I have one request to you. There will be no delay on our part, that we do our best to fulfill all our agreements within this year, and then we can easily add more than 100 million to the trade turnover, said the Belarusian leader. That's very interesting. That Belarus is interested in adopting the technological prowess of Iran. Very interesting. All right, watch this space. We'll be back with more news.